These beds are all rock bordered. You can see that their soil level is pretty much at grade. I used the existing soil here, and the only amendment was just mulches and time, and just planting different things, and they've just become more and more productive over time. They weren't. Hey there, I had a person recently ask me how much does it cost to build a no-till bed. This was a comment in a YouTube video, I believe, and I found that to be an interesting question. And I've done lots of videos on building beds. I love doing it. I look forward to a point in time when I don't have to do it, but it seems like there's always something to be done around the garden. And this is the time of year to start. It's still a bit too hot to be doing that sort of heavy work here, but late September, October, November, that's the time of year to build beds in your garden and do all that stuff. So I'm glad that some viewers are thinking about that sort of thing. But the question was, how much does it cost to build a no-till bed? And the short answer is as much as you want to spend. A lot of the beds I have in my garden here I didn't spend a thing on. They're bordered with rocks that I got from a hill over there. And the soil was just the soil that was right there in the ground. Even beds that someone might say are raised beds. So in my garden, 90% of the raised beds, they're raised insofar as the soil level is about 4 inches above grade, so not very high, just a little bit, right? And a lot of my beds are right at grade. The camera right there is sitting in a sort of rock bed, and those gardens grow at grade or maybe an inch or two above grade. So I got the rocks for free. I use the existing soil, and I amend it with mulch every year, which I get for free. People throw it out on the side of the road in the fall when they're raking leaves and stuff like that. It's mostly leaves. I've used spoiled hay from stables. I've used seaweed from the shore. There's no one particular thing I use, and no one particular thing that I think is better than one thing or another. You use what you can get for free, would be my opinion. And also, if you're an environmental type, use the thing that's going to have the lowest ecological impact, right? There's a beach I can drive to where I can get seaweed, but it's about 20 minutes each way, so I got to drive for 40 minutes to get seaweed. So I got to use gasoline to get seaweed, right? So I collect seaweed if I'm going to the beach to do some fishing, or I'm going to the beach to do some swimming, and I'm there anyway, then I'll collect some seaweed. I don't like making it a specific trip. It's one thing if you've got a buddy with a truck and you're going to load the thing right up, and you're getting after a really good storm. There's all kinds of seaweed washed up really high on shore, just dead seaweed, and you're making the sort of most of it. But I've just got a car. I can only put a couple Kia Forte, so I can only put a couple bins of it in there. So I really don't get much per trip. But every day I have to drive to work. I work in the city, and I just have to do that drive. And as I'm driving to and from work, I leave a little bit early in the morning or on the way home. At the end of the day, people put out leaves at the end of the road in the fall, and I grab a couple bags a day, almost every day, and I just pile them up back here, right? At some point in the fall, I don't have to pile them up. I just throw them on my beds, right? The beds are the place. Where do you store the leaves? On your beds, right? I'm getting off topic here, but again, it's about price, right? So some of my beds are 4x8 or 4x10 wooden boxes, and I'd say the wood might cost about $20 or more or less. It really depends on what you want to build. Some of the wood in a lumber mill is what might be called seconds. So it's lumber that's been damaged in some way, or it's flawed in some way. It's got a really weird knot, or it's got a bit of a twist or a wow in it, or it's been damaged by a forklift or something like that. So it's not perfect for building. It won't work for framing and all that sort of stuff, right? But it's perfectly fine for putting a box and filling it with dirt. I found that 2x6, just a basic spruce 2x6. Most of my beds I use spruce 2x6. I don't think you need anything more than that. If you can get those as seconds, you can get them for like $3 each, right? For an 8-footer, 2x6 by 8 feet. One of those will last. I've got some here that are starting to break down, and I think I'm going to have to replace them this year. So they would have been built in 2012. So what is that? 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 7 years. I got 7 years out of that, right? So that's the thing about wood, right? It doesn't last. Now I just bought the. I'm sure if I got the wood with all that green stuff on it, the preservative, they last a bit longer. I don't know how much longer. I also just didn't want to mess with any sort of, I really don't understand the chemical composition of the, the anti-rotting agents that they put in that stuff. It's also just cheaper to buy the untreated wood, so it doesn't last as long, but you're not worried about anything sort of breaking down and getting into your soil, and it's cheaper anyway, and it's all, I don't care what you build your garden out of, it's going to rot eventually anyway. Anyway, so you can say you get about 7 years out of those, maybe more depending on your situation and the conditions where you grow and so on and so forth. Some of my beds are made with, what's that called? Rough milled lumber. Like you can go to a mill and they'll run it off with a saw, and it's not perfectly dimensional, but it's much heavier. So you'll get like a 2x8 or a 2x6, and it'll be like, 2 inches by 8 inches. You buy a 2x6 in a hardware store, it's really like 5 1/4 by 1 3/4. It's not really the full dimension. So when you get those rough cut ones, they cost a little bit less per lineal foot, and they're just more solid, so you can get more out of them. I have a dream in my mind of building a garden someday where all the beds are bordered with solid hemlock 6x6 or something like that. And all these things cost money. I like to go cheap. I really like the rock bordered garden because rocks, I can get them for free, and they gather heat, and they look really cool. The garden has a real sort of nature look. One drawback with a rock bordered garden is you really can't kneel on the rocks. Right? A 6x6 is nice because you can sit on it, you can kneel on it. Right? It's sort of a nice surface. But of course that's going to cost money, it's going to rot. Another thing about the rocks is that the plant roots like to go underneath the rocks, and it's always moist underneath the rocks, so they help conserve moisture. And they just have a really cool look. But anyway, let me just take you around and show you some different types of, every bed I have in my garden is a no-till bed by virtue of the fact that I don't till anything. So let me just show you some of those different types, okay? So here in this part of the garden, all the beds are boxes, right? They're 4x10 boxes, and they're using 2x6. And I'd say each of these beds probably cost about $20 in terms of materials. I didn't buy any soil. I used the existing soil. I mended it with these ones here. I mended it with horse manure and different mulches, and some of them I've dug them up and thrown rotten logs underneath as hugelkultur beds. I've got lots of videos on those. If you look, just search for the word hugelkultur and maritime, and you'll get my videos on that. That's another great way to sort of make soil. In a sense, you're kind of making soil out of rotten logs. It's a simple way of putting it. It's a great way to charge up a garden and get soil without spending any money. So those are 2x6 beds. This bed, it was made with 2x8 using rough milled lumber. I don't know if you can see, but it's beefy. It's actually 2 inches. In some cases, it's even 2.5 inches by 8 inches fully, right? This stuff just lasts a lot longer because it's so much heavier. So if you can get that, if you can get the rough milled lumber, I'd go with that because it's just so much beefier, and you get sort of better value for money if you're going to go with lumber. Here's another one of those rough milled lumber boxes. You can sort of, I don't know if you can tell the contrast. There's one over there, which is just regular 2x6, and it's the rough milled, just so much more substantial, right? But depending on where you live, this might actually cost more. If you live out in the boonies somewhere, this might be the cheaper option. If you live in an urban center, this might be really hard to come by and might actually cost more. So you got to go with what works, what's cheap, and what works for you. This is a rhubarb garden just at the border, and didn't cost anything. I just used the existing soil and logs, just dead trees. My garden backs onto a forest, and dead trees are everywhere. So easy to come by, and I got lots of neighbors with dead trees, so I have an almost endless supply of dead trees whenever I want them. The dimensional lumber is better for making boxes because you can sort of make nice tight corners and nail them together, but you can totally get by using just dead trees and stuff like these. These are spruce. I find they rot a lot faster than lumber for some reason, maybe 5 years, maybe 6 years, and they get kind of soft. Well, it really depends on what you make them out of, what kind of wood. Spruce holds up fairly well, especially if you get the bark off it. These beds are all rock bordered. You can see that the soil level is pretty much at grade. I used the existing soil here, and the only amendment was just mulches and time, and just planting different things, and they've just become more and more productive over time. They weren't super productive their first year, but you keep mulching them and you use exercise some crop rotation, and eventually you get, you know, really productive beds. Didn't spend a cent on these, just put my time in. There's some rock bordered beds that I built this spring. I really think this is the end of expanding my garden. Anyway, I built these just using the existing soil. And I mean, this one looks dead, but it's all potatoes are ready to be harvested. The potatoes grow and then they die and then you harvest them. Those are ready to be harvested. The squash is still growing, and to give a sense of, you know, first year results, look at that baby. That's Georgia Candy Roaster. What a monster, right? So good results. Got more squash over here. This is a blue Hubbard, and you know, more potatoes and onions and different things. But anyway, I got different kinds of beds here. There's a log bed, there's a rock bed, there's a rough milled lumber wood, and there's you can see the log bed. And you don't even have to border them. I just sort of like to make my walking spaces and my gardening spaces distinct with, you know, various means of framing up a garden. You don't have to do it that way. It's just, for me, I like it. Helps keep things organized in my mind. But I don't like spending money on it, that's for sure. Anyway, just a few thoughts on what it costs to build no-till gardens. The great thing about no-till gardens is that they're no-cost gardens, right? Doesn't cost much or nothing. Really depends on your imagination, the resources and materials you have on hand, and what are available in your area, and your own just ingenuity and creativity. You don't have to spend anything if you can source out the materials. And even if you do have to spend money, you don't have to go crazy. There's lots of videos on YouTube with people using like galvanized this and using cinder blocks and spending ridiculous amounts of money. I mean, as I've said many times before, the plants don't care what you build your garden bed of. They care about the soil, right? It's about the soil. And as long as you're giving the soil what it needs, giving the organisms that live in the soil to do what they do, which will improve your soil, which will give you awesome plants. Right? As long as you're doing that, you'll have a good garden. The thing the garden's in, and number one, you don't even need a thing for the garden to be in. But if you like that sort of thing, if you like to border things, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be anything. I would say find something cheap. That would be my advice. So what does it cost to build a no garden? Doesn't cost nothing. Hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. Click the little bell in this YouTube video and you'll get notified when I make new videos. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.